good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It seems like we have people from all over the world joining this webinar. And and now I would like to talk about perseverance, which is in every part of our pilot growth DNA. And also, as most of you have your own kids and other kids in your family, we also have some students in this webinar. I'd like to share my solo sailing voyage across the Pacific Ocean to inspire all the kids out there to dream big. Actually, it's not just the kids, but other entrepreneurs who in Pilot Growth's eyes are all our kids. So entrepreneurs like John, just a few minutes ago, he was also a co-founder of his first company, CB Insights. He built it to a great success and now doing it again. And this is what we call the being uncommon of uncommon. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So just overall, the Single-Handed Sailing Society puts on the Singlehanded TransPac SHTP Race every 2 years, ever since the first race way back in 1978. Since then, more people have made it to the outer space than have raced single-handed from San Francisco to Hawaii. And single-handling doesn't make the race any easier. Every skipper is responsible for navigating, cooking, sailing really hard, and all the while fixing what breaks along the way. And there are many things that were broken in my case. And also, how is it different from the regular TransPac, for your sailors out there? So the magic is the purity of this event. There are no big parties after sailing solo across the ocean, 2,200 miles. You do not sail into a marina or a busy harbor in Waikiki. Instead, you drop anchor at a remote anchorage in Kauai, which is one of the furthest west and most remote accessible locations in Hawaii. And once you get there, you don't just step on land, but instead you have to take the dinghy or just swim or ashore and meet under a tree on the beach. So the objective is to get to the tree. So a tree, you would say, wait, it's got to be a very special tree, right? So under this tree at sunset in Halalei Bay, you will share the highlights and sometimes lowlights, and it hopefully eventually becomes the highlights. And just talk about stories about your journey with race committee, family, and friends, and your fellow skippers. And then here's a photo of tree time on the upper right-hand corner. This is a photo from the 1978 inaugural race. So it's 30 sailors, I think pretty crazy sailors back then, just decided to do this. 22 finished. And for the 2021 race, which commenced on the June 19th, 2012 last year, there were 11 sailors. We were all hanging out under the same tree after 43 years. In terms of experience, I had the least in this year's race. I only got 20 years of sailing experience. The next person had 30 years of sailing experience, but he was only 30 years old. And he actually became this year's winner. And the next up was people with 40 to 50 years experience. And here are a couple of well-known figures in this race. As you see some of these photos, you're familiar with the faces. Steve Fawcett, the famous adventurer who held many records in aviation and sailing. He holds the single-handed TransPac record at 7 days, 22 hours from 1998. Jean Socrates, the oldest person and woman at age 77 who sailed around the world nonstop solo via 5 Great Capes in 2019. She competed in the 2006 single-handed TransPac. It took 20 days and 15 hours to finish. So for me, it took me about 17 days and 16 hours to finish. And so here's a little history of my sailing background. And the first time I ever set foot on a sailboat was on a 18-foot Hobie Cat, a small catamaran dinghy. I was 19 years old, second year student at Carnegie Mellon University. I got a job as a summer intern, engineering intern at Motorola in Chicago. And that was 30 years ago. On a Wednesday afternoon, my engineering manager, kind enough, took me out sailing on Lake Michigan. It was exhilarating. I was completely hooked. But I did not have the means or time to pursue a hobby like sailing. I had to wait 9 years later until after selling my first company in 2000. Here was me on my first sailboat on the left hand corner. It was a very simple 47-foot boat for someone who had no experience sailing at all. And quickly I realized, you know what, I need an ocean-going vessel. So I purchased my second boat from a Dutch family in the Netherlands. That boat was much bigger and stronger, and she was built in Sweden and designed to go anywhere in the world. And here I was, crawling under the engine compartment, doing much of the maintenance myself. And since then, I had sailed in the North Sea, Mediterranean, Adriatic, the Caribbean, Sea of Cortez, the French Polynesia, the Great Barrier Reef, New Zealand, Tonga, the Andaman Sea, the East and West Atlantic Ocean, and North Pacific Ocean. So Sea Wisdom, the red vessel here, is my third boat. It's the smallest of the boats that I've ever owned because there's just nowhere to go cruising from San Francisco. It's pretty rough out there. So it's a 1987 Hinkley Southwester 42 competition sloop, a rather iconic American classic boat built in Maine. The name Sea Wisdom is named after my wife, Chloe. It's actually her literal name in Chinese. And just like my entrepreneurial career of starting and running businesses, I learned most from being in difficult situations or at times failures. And so in the summer of 2002, like 20 years ago, a couple of days after transiting from the North Sea of my newly acquired second boat from the Netherlands, we were motoring towards the sunset in English Channel because there was lack of wind. And all of a sudden, the engine stopped and the boat was, drifting in dust. And so I had to put on a wetsuit, tether myself to the boat, and jumped into the really murky water of English Channel to find out what was going on underneath the boat. And there was a huge fishing net wrapped around the propeller. So I tried to cut the net to free it, but without a scuba gear or dive tank, we were kind of dead in the water. So we had to call for rescue from the Royal Navy lifeboat to tow us to England. Then, since then, I've always had a scuba gear in my boat. In fact, I had 3 tanks in Sea Wisdom during my solo voyage to Hawaii for triple redundancy. More lessons. So my second major maritime incident was 2 years ago, 30 miles from San Francisco, west of the Farallon Islands, during my qualifying race for the Singlehanded TransPac. I competed in the 2019 Great Pacific Longitude Race, a 450 miles round-trip single-handed race from San Francisco to the Pacific Ocean. The body of water in this region has a nickname called Gale Alley, and this was a qualifying race for the Singlehanded TransPac. So I think it goes like this: if you can survive 3 to 4 days solo in the Gale Alley, then you're qualifying to sail 2,200 miles to Hawaii. So I was the last boat to cross the starting line at the beginning of the race. And the last day, I ended up becoming the leader, as the most of the competitors dropped out the race because of sustained rough sea condition. However, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, hearing the crushing sound of fiberglass. The photo here on the upper right-hand side shows that the bracket holding the upper part of the rudder was ripped apart. My spare independent rudder and steering system was also knocked out of position. This rendered me without the ability to steer the boat. And later on, after getting rescued by the U.S. Coast Guard, I learned that this failure was caused by hitting an underwater object, which could be a whale or some sort of marine animal. One interesting thing during the rescue was that the Coast Guard arrived at my GPS coordinate, but they were not able to visually locate me. And everyone was surprised. So even after I launched the flare signal in the air, they couldn't find me. So I can talk about this on another webinar. So lesson learned here is that even the best redundancy system can cause a carefully planned mission to fail. So from this experience, I commissioned the boatyard to redesign and rebuild the main rudder completely in metal and added even more redundancy in the system. So now you're wondering, why in the world would I want to do this race across the Pacific Ocean alone? So many people hesitate to change their circumstances because they fear a departure from status quo or because they're used to a life of security and conformity. And to me, the change could really bring a new set of possibilities as well as problems. And I wanted to embrace change. And there's no greater joy than an endless changing horizon for each day to wake up to a different sunrise. I have sought that joy, earning to cast away really the security of my daily life to let my spirits roam freely. So I was reminded of David Goggins' Calloused Mind, which some of you have probably read his book, in which he writes, you have to build calluses, in your brain, like how you build calluses on your hands, and callous your mind through pain and suffering. So as you can see my hands here in the photo during my voyage, my hands were completely chafed 24/7 during the voyage. And as well as my mind was building callus, I was happy, as you can see. I wanted to push the limits of my endurance, to prolong experience of suffering, to really break down my inner wall, and to cleanse my spirit for simpler and pure emotions, and to really surpass myself as a human being. So my goal was not to win the race, definitely not, but really to get to Kauai and inspire kids and entrepreneurs to dream big. And I was very familiar with building redundancy into systems. My master's project at Cornell University was all about that. It was the dawn of Java era, and my research team and I created fault tolerance systems that allowed Java network applications to run on early days of internet infrastructure. So this knowledge led to the foundation, the founding of my first company, which was the engine that powered many of the e-commerce for the internet during the late 90s and early 2000s. Now that technology is part of Oracle. Actually, I have a few of my co-founders on this webinar listening to this. And for this solo voyage, I built double or triple redundancy in everything that I can think of. Rudder, sails, halyards, water makers, communication devices, solar panels, battery systems, even life rafts. And I have spare parts of spares. It's almost like having two boats in one boat. So overall, it took about 5 years of preparation since owning Sea Wisdom. As for the weakest link on the boat, you're probably wondering, that was me. I was the weakest link. I was never a physically strong or fit person. For people who know me for many years, I attribute this to eating too much ramen and drinking soda while sitting in front of computer coding during my youth. It took me 2 years of training, physical training, to do my very first pull-up, and it took me a total about 4 years. Now I can do more than 10 pull-ups in a row. But before I was able to do pull-ups, I always had a weak core and trouble back. One time I was admitted to an ER for back pain. So building physical strength was a requirement for me to enter this race. Mentally, I was all ready to go to pursue my dream. However, I would never find out how mentally difficult this journey was until after doing it. The mental challenge ended up to be the most difficult part of sailing across the ocean alone. My first aid kit had every possible medication for dealing with various infections and pain. I also had medical devices to help me survive the ocean for 3 months. As you can see, I have kits that would deal with bleeding, fractures, wound care, dental, etc. But I surely did not know how to use most of these medical tools. So I had 2 books with me, so I can refer to it if necessary. Another requirement for this race was for all skippers to attend a safety at sea course. Here's a picture of me practicing riding a life raft, climbing inside of it. As you can see, we were inside of the calm water of a marina, even under this ideal condition. It was difficult to maneuver. So I couldn't really imagine how difficult it would be in the ocean, in the open ocean. By the way, having good food and sleep is your weapon. I provisioned for 69 days, over 200 meals. I end up only eating 1 meal per day. I probably could have lasted 150 days in the ocean with this provision. As you can see here, I have about 16 different varieties of meals, so I can have a different meal every day to keep my spirits up. My typical meal of the day is one package of freeze-dried foods such as yellow curry and rice and chicken. Then I would add spices such as Sichuan numbing peppercorn oil, mixing in some home-cooked air-dried tomatoes and jalapenos. All I had to do was to add hot water, and magically I had this. I would have a gourmet meal. While I was waiting for this to cook, I would drink a soup, and the soup will be a bone broth with ginger or nori tea soup with ginger and Japanese dried veggies. My wife Chloe, she also baked me some digestive cookies, but I had to really ration them as afternoon snacks. Only one cookie was allowed per day to make them last. My daily calorie intake ended up to be about only 500 to 1,000, which is definitely not enough because I needed about 2,000 calories a day to maintain my energy. I ended up losing 13 pounds in 18 days. I highly don't recommend this kind of weight loss regimen. But one thing that I loved on board is a soda machine. I get to make sparkling water using water from desalinating ocean water. It's really incredible using solar power, which is completely natural, to charge the batteries and to create uh, soda water just naturally. It's really incredible. So, what are the challenges out there? Uh, Number one is you have to sleep and eat well. And as you can see, I got great food to choose from. I try to sleep after sun goes down, setting an alarm every 2 to 4 hours, depending on the sea conditions. I will wake up and make sure the boat is on course and the sails were trimmed right. Most importantly, there were no other vessels that I will run into. For collision avoidance, I used AIS, automatic identification system, and radar at night, and set up a automatic alarm when there were boats on a collision course that I can see. Here's an example of a 600-foot uh, cargo ship called European Highway that got really close to me in the middle of the night. Good thing I had the alarm set up and woke me up around midnight. That cargo ship was heading to Hawaii as well and was on the same course as all the other Transpac sailboats. So I radioed the boat and make sure that her captain knew that there were other sailboats out there. He'll be looking out for them. He said he saw me on AIS on the radar, but I told him that hey, some of the other boats might not have may not be transmitting their AIS and have a weak radar return. And I usually try to take an afternoon nap after I finish all my chores for the day and before I prepare for the night sail. So what are other challenges out there? So here are the easy stuff that I'm going to talk about, okay? And so they can be easily overcome. When I wake up every morning, it would take me 2 to 3 hours to walk around the deck to check all systems. Every single nuts and bolts that I had access to, I inspect them all. Make adjustments when necessary. Then I will perform the same inspection ritual again before nighttime. So it took me about 4 to 6 hours every day to inspect, make sure everything was working properly. You're probably wondering why I do this, right? So a screw could be tight the last minute, moments later, it could be loosened, okay? And hours later, it could just disappear for good. And chafing was a real concern. So I needed to make minimal adjustments to make sure the lines and sails are not chafed. And these are relatively easy things to deal with. By the way, as you know, I'm a software person. So debugging the satellite communication software was frustrating, but fulfilling. And I had to do it. Here's a photo of me replacing a electric bilge pump when I was passing the Farallon Islands on my first day. It was rough out there in the Gale Alley. What is not showing here is that it took me like some acrobatic move, like to crawl upside down inside of a galley compartment to perform this repair. I didn't have my sea legs yet, so my stomach was ready to vomit at any moment. But heck, I had to replace it and make sure that replacing the replacement worked. Otherwise, I have to turn around and abandon the whole race as I was still early in the voyage. Without a electrical bilge pump, it will be dangerous to carry on a 2,200-mile ocean crossing. And then there was weather to contend with. This year, we either had too little or not, or no wind, or sudden squalls that could change wind direction and increase wind speed drastically. I had 3 independent satellite communication devices on board. The most reliable one had a hardware failure in the second day, leaving me with only 2 devices. So when the second satellite device started to acting up, I had to debug it. By the way, I was never a good hardware mechanic person, but I love the challenge of debugging software. The Iridium Go was my main satellite communication system, but it would only intermittently transmit data. So it took me about 10 days to debug that problem as well. Oh, by the way, the water maker was not producing 100% potable water a few days into the voyage. So I ended up drinking that water anyway because the water tasted fine to me. But the water quality probe showing the conductivity and parts per million, they were unsafe to drink. And here's something that was much harder to deal with, just harder, okay? At one point, I had to submerge myself into the ocean to work on a repair while staring into this blue abyss in the middle of the ocean. I found out that my spare autopilot and my spare rudder, a hydrovane, which was attached to the back of the boat, called the transom of the boat, became loose. I realized that there was a missing bolt. Well, what do you do in this case? How do you replace a missing bolt in the middle of the ocean when you don't have a spare bolt? Well, nobody can help you. You can't go to Home Depot, and so you have to get very creative here on the resource that you currently have. And of course, in order to replace the boat, I had to submerge myself into the ocean. So I got a little bit creative with a Dyneema soft shackle. So you can see upper right-hand corner here. To replace a steel bolt, I had to tether myself on 2 independent attachment points in case one fails. So comparing to jumping into the English Channel with crew, this was much more dangerous. And because it was solo operation and the boat was sailing, however slowly, I could tangle myself and drown without anyone to rescue me. And here's a photo of the underbody of Sea Wisdom. Look at that blue water. It's just beautiful. When I went down to the ocean, it's just super clear water, absolutely gorgeous. And I'm glad I made this repair at sea, because without this spare autopilot and spare rudder, I will be in serious trouble on what happens next. So, okay, so this is kind of this challenge is devastating. Okay, so after sailing over 2,000 miles and with less than 200 miles to go, I jibed on a different angle. Now on a port tack for the first time in days, and I started looking for any unusual behavior on the boat, as always. But I immediately noticed that some clicking noise in the upper rudder bearing, and within a few hours, I discovered the rudder had dropped an inch. I was completely shocked, and this was recently rebuilt, and should have been the most reliable part of the whole boat. And I knew I wouldn't be able to raise up the rudder in the middle of the ocean with these relentless wind and waves. So I stay calm because there's nothing else besides staying calm and try to figure out how to solve that problem. So instead, I tried to stabilize by minimizing any rudder movement, reduce sail, and locked the rudder in center position and let the jury-rigged hydrovane to do the steering. Remember the thing that I just fixed when I had to jump into the middle of the ocean a few days ago? And then also, to be extra prudent, I slept with my EPIRB emergency beacon next to me and prepare the life raft and the abandoned ship bag. And here are some photos of the broken rudder with written notes. I sent these photos via satellite to my land-based my land-based team to consult with them on what to do. This was devastating, and thank God these people were amazing to support me from land. So as you can see, my passage was plagued by light wind conditions, assorted with equipment failures. It was all an emotional roller coaster between really hopeless despair and beaming bliss while surfing down waves in the trade winds. So according to a fellow sailor on the race committee, so afterwards she told me the highs were really high and the lows were really, really low. And much more so than anything that you can experience on land. And I could not agree with her more. It was an ultimate test of mental toughness and seamanship. So I constantly heard the wind and the boat chanting to me in a song when I was sailing during this trip. It was a song that I never heard before. It went on for days in my head, and I don't think it was in my head. It was just sound producing from the wind. And the engine, when it was being used to charge the batteries, sang another song. Apparently, it was also common for solo sailors to hear human voices during solo voyages at sea. So I woke up with less than 200 miles to go and really considering just abandon this whole thing and just give up. I would not, I would simply just change my destination to another marina called the Nawili Willie Marina and still complete my goal of sailing solo across the ocean to Kauai, but avoid this particular distressing tack. Then when I learned of the extreme outpour of support coming from the finish line, Holiday Bay, two sailboats and the race committee will wait for me at the finish line after dark. I felt like I was no longer alone. So here's my diary from the day that reads, SHTP Sailors and Race Committee suggested that once I crossed the finish line, they would help me diagnose the rudder problem and even offered to have a flotilla of boats to guide me from Holiday Bay to Nawili Willie. With incredible sportsmanship and camaraderie, they are offering help to encourage me to get to the finish line, not so far away. So I was crying. My tears started rolling uncontrollably. I knew I had to cross that finish line for myself, for my family, my friends out there, and for all those people who supported me. So with that, I changed course back towards Holiday Bay. The wind died a little bit, which was kind of good because my boat was just a mess. The sea was not as rough. So under a hot sun, I doused myself with a gallon of fresh water to rinse off all the mess from my tears. I pulled on my jib and really charged for the finish line. Like I was going war with Ku, the Hawaiian for God of War, and also my race division. Even though I was really limping along slowly, the sails act as drums and drum beats. So as you can imagine, this sounds like a scene from Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones when the warriors were marching to war. And the camaraderie, there was no less of that. Just before 1 a.m. midnight local time, in pitch darkness, I heard the SHTP Race chair on the VHF radio. He said, congratulations, Sea Wisdom. You have successfully completed the 2021 Singlehanded TransPacific Yacht Race. My heart just swelled. It was an incredible moment. A 90 horsepower rib came alongside me, and two race committee members boarded Sea Wisdom. One took over the tiller on my jewelry rigged rudder, and the other person gave me a big hug. And I dropped the sail. A light rain started falling, like the sky was cheering for me too. Two of my fellow competitors cheered for me across the finish line, even though it was well past midnight. So after 18 days at sea, I woke at 6 a.m. on July 7th. I looked out and peered out my little tiny porthole from my boat, I see this massive green tower, massive green wave towering over me. So I was like, where am I? And then I remember, hey, you know what? I'm anchored in Hollow Lake Bay, and that green wave was actually the Nampali Coast mountain range. Where they filmed the Jurassic Park. So I was like, I made it. I made it. Start crying again. Tears started as I thought about the whole experience and everyone who has supported me. I mean, I just let it out, like a kid. So even though I was the last boat to cross the finish line and the second last to finish under the handicap rating, I was awarded the Perseverance Trophy for this really insurmountable challenge to get across the finish line. I think this award should really go to the people who supported me along the way and after the race. They're the people who really persevered. And after finishing the race, I cried again because all the love I got from this trip, I cried because of all I learned about what it takes to be human, to love, to be loved, to have gratitude, to strive to stay alive, to figure out things that, regardless of challenges, to find joy in adventures, to lift away hopelessness. I cried because I learned that there's always a way to move forward. So, to all the kids and entrepreneurs in all corners of the world, dream big. One day you'll make it happen. Who would have thought a little kid like me, from Longdong in Shanghai? As you can see the upper image here, a kid from an old apartment in North Point, Hong Kong, and a paper boy and a janitor from South Brunswick, New Jersey, where I went to high school, would get to sail solo across the Pacific Ocean to Kauai. And what I found out later was I was the first Asian and Chinese American to finish this race. So to all the children that I've met sailing in remote locations, you can also do the same. Go for the uncommon and be the uncommon of the uncommon. It can all happen to you. So sailing solo is uncommon. Solo sailing across the Pacific Ocean is uncommon of uncommon. Winning it and doing it again is the uncommon of the uncommon of the uncommon. And this also goes to all the entrepreneurs out there. So starting a business is uncommon. Successfully exiting a business is uncommon of the uncommon. And doing it again is uncommon of the uncommon of the uncommon. So at Pilot Growth, we're here to support our entrepreneurs to achieve their dreams of doing the uncommon of the uncommon and building a calloused mind and dream big. So I'm happy to take some questions from the audience before I finish with the video diary of this journey. I'm hoping that the audio will work now this time. Okay. So I think I'm seeing some questions. So for people who are dreaming big but are concerned of the risk of taking the leap to be an entrepreneur, what's your advice? So when I started my first company with 4 of my co-founders, I know some of you are out there listening. We were all about 25 years old. We were like kids. But we thought about starting a company way before that. Well, why didn't we do it? Because we were all afraid that we were not good enough. We lacked the confidence. It was only after working on some huge projects and taking leadership positions early in our career, taking risks, we realized we could build anything. So at that same time, we were young and we were not wise or just plain foolish. So foolish enough to not worry about the odds of success. So 4 out of 5 of us were all first-generation immigrants to the U.S. from 4 different countries with different ethnic background. We had to do or die an attitude. We worked around the clock. We have nothing to lose, and this is what it takes. Steve Jobs' commencement speech: "Stay hungry, stay foolish," is absolutely the spirit here. Maybe look at the other questions. So here's this one. What is your advice uh, for kids who don't even know how to dream big? And what do you tell them? So, um, well, there are kids all over the world, with many different backgrounds. Some kids just dream of getting fed. That's their dream. And have just wanted to have shelter over their head. And I got to meet some of them while sailing at different parts of the world. And like most kids, uh, kids are just naturally curious bunch, whether I meet them in a fishing village in a remote South Pacific island or Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. A few times, these kids saw me sailing into their villages, and they naturally wondered, like, who's this person? How did he get here? They started asking me more questions about cooking, languages and cultures, navigations and histories, and the physics of a sailboat. They're like, wow, this sounds fun. And some of them told me that they want to do this, something like this, one of these days. So it's this curiosity, and also having role models and meeting interesting people. Kids will have the opportunity to get inspired. So this is important for us as adults to or as older person to inspire kids, and also inspire the younger people to actually reach out to them and as role model. And it is this internal drive of curiosity and wanting to have fun while achieving your goal. So we want to encourage that and give kids the opportunity to experience that. Let me look for a little bit more questions. Let's see. Yes. So a question is saying, what's harder, getting to the starting line or getting to the finish line? Actually, that's a great question. Yeah, getting to the starting line is really, really hard. It takes years of preparation. It takes a dream, and then, um, and I would say, a lot of people, I would say, entrepreneurs in particular, uh, never get to start there. They have a lot of ideas, but they never started their first company because they realized there's just too many risks. So for me personally, it's they're all different kind of challenges, and just because uh, somebody finished a uh, a voyage, a huge project, or starting a company successfully and getting to an exit, it doesn't mean that the starting part was easy. It's equally difficult, and yeah, it's definitely not easy. Can you say that question again? So the question is, in retrospect, what would I do differently to mitigate the risk? Um, yeah, so I mean, as you can see, I have double and triple redundancy, and I think I did my best. I really did. I don't see how I can be better prepared for this trip. Um, and I mean, I was never this prepared in my life. And one of my co-founders for my first companies, for my first company and second company, he's also a very experienced sailor. He said, "Will, this trip is all about you as a human being. You're the most prepared for this. You're not going to start. Okay, you're just the most. You're as prepared as you can be as a human being. Why is that? It's not just the systems. It's not just the boat. Mentally, mentally, you're there. You learned everything that you need to know. At this point, I could wait and learn more, but then, you know, I need to learn from a job. Like building a startup is the same thing. You will never learn everything that you need to learn. You just have to do it, and you learn from mistakes of building your first startup or doing your first huge adventure. You learn from failures, you learn from success, and it's really from doing it that you become better. And then you become better and better every time you become more better prepared. So what would I do differently? I I would not. I would just keep doing it. I'll do it again. uh, well, this will be a. So, what would be your ideal boat for short-handed blue water sailing? This, I think, coming from a sailor out there. It will be. This will be another webinar. But I value safety, ease of use, reliability over speed or anything else. I'd like a boat that is strong, self-sufficient, and have minimal environmental impact that can go to all corners of the world with short-handed crew. So in the future, I would like to do more sailing with my wife, Chloe. So comfort and safety are really important to us. So it's not just a boat to go places, but a comfortable boat, and that's like a home that we can manage remotely. I think I have time to take one last question. I think the question is, would you do this trip again? If not, what is your next big adventure? Yes. Well, I'm always doing big adventures, not solo at work at Pilot Growth. We're a great teamwork here. We help people achieve their dreams, and dreams are so big that changes the world. So, I mean, these are huge adventures, and so I'm doing big adventures every day. And it's fun. So I think we're ready to hop on to put my video diary on, and so if you can play the video, that'll be great. And thank you so much